Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first forms class of the new year. Obviously, let's see, volume is up all the way. I would check your volume. Lot of questions been coming in. Woo! I think my phone, I had to have my phone connected to a battery all day yesterday. They were coming in fierce. Lots of questions. I'll say my top two questions I keep getting. Probably the stuff about either the straddling transactions. There's definitely some confusion going on with what the attorneys are saying for what the law says. What the law says is that anything that started in 2023, so with your sellers, you have a listing, it's pending, or even if it's not pending, you need to have a Form 18 to amend your listing to show the disclosure of the new limited dual agency, whether you're doing limited dual agency or not. It's supposed to be disclosed whether or not that they see this. Northwest MLS, a couple of other attorneys are like, well, that's not really necessary. I don't know. And so now that they're kind of like hands off, they're kind of stepping away like, we're not going to, please defer to the DOL. So now they're kind of stepping back a little bit from it. I'm not too worried about if you got a listing, you already had it signed, it's pending, it's closing. I'm not too worried about the one. Jim and I talked about it yesterday too. He's not too worried about that one. If you have a listing and it's not sold yet, it's not pending, then yes, go ahead, get the 18 signed. They can initial and agree for limited dual agency. It's fine, or they don't have to. It's more or less a redisclosure of limited dual agency. That is a new thing. And you do have to give every single client the new pamphlet. So regardless, that's like questions been coming up too. Like, do I have to give this still? It's already pending. I already gave them the old pamphlet. Nope, you got to give them the new one. So go ahead and make sure that you give that. Let's see, the other big question I keep getting to is about questions about if someone's watching your business or if you have a team member that is working with your client. If they provide any brokerage services. What is brokerage services, Eric? Opening blocks, showing houses, doing addendums, negotiating, talking, communicating with the client in a capacity that you normally would be doing. Or if you're on vacation, we have someone who's on vacation, they have someone watching their business. That person is providing brokerage services on your behalf now to the principal. So you will have to get a Form 18 signed, adding that person to the deal. To the agreement of providing brokerage services.
So
Make sense?
Is the 18 an addendum to like listing and buying?
It's a listing amendment, 18.
Okay.
If you have someone who's watching your business, that's we're gonna get into that as a buyer broker. We're gonna get in that on the 41A after we do the 41.
What about PCs?
PCs. And this is another one that attorneys are arguing on. They're not really like direct. If they're giving just the blank, the upfront communication, Jim and I are fine with it. Like your normal conversing. If you're negotiating, you're doing addendums, you're more involved. That's where you need to be on there. The TC would have to. So anybody who has a TC that is like directly communicating to your client, and they're discussing any type of addendums in depth and negotiating, then yeah, you're gonna have to have the TC sign on either the 18 or a 41A. So it's really, it's really a thing about whether or not they're doing a lot. The normal, hey, here's the information of the transaction. Here's the connection to escrow. No, that's really not what the law was meant to do. And Jim and I are not worried about that. Last but not least, to make it very, very, very clear that we cannot pay you on any transactions where you're representing a buyer and you do not have a buyer brokerage service agreement or the John L. Scott agency agreement. You have to have one or the other signed. And that doesn't matter if it was a deal from 2023 and closing in 2024. You have to get it signed.
Is the John L. Scott one out now?
It is. In fact, I'm gonna share my screen. For you in Zoom, it's gonna be hard for me to click back and forth, especially when sharing screen. So I'll do what I can, but just keep that in mind.
I have a question, Eric.
Yes.
If you have a buyer agency agreement from 2023, would that still work for 2024?
No,
Or you need to get it signed, the new
you
one?
have to amend. You have to amend it with a 41A. If you use the John L. Scott version, you can use the John L. Scott 41A. So that's the thing too. If you're gonna start out using like the John L. Scott version, you have to use the John L. Scott versions for the update, for the amendments. If you're gonna use the Northwest MLS version, you have to use the Northwest MLS version for the update. So just keep that also in mind.
Oh,
Would you rather have us being the John Scott one?
It doesn't matter to
Either
me.
one.
I mean, the John L. Scott version is definitely, it's easier to explain to a client when it's got a graphic right on the front,
Right.
explaining the things you're gonna be doing and the order in which you're doing things. It is very helpful. These will be added. They just did, Aaron, our attorney, just did one last update on the 27th of December. So literally there was two, since the class, that we had in here, last month, we had the new agency law in Washington State course. John L. Scott updated that course already, and Aaron's already updated the buyer representation agreement. So Northwest MLS should have it by about Friday-ish is what she's saying. But you can get into your My Desk, and if you just search for JLS INC in the John Scott library, if you just do a search, you'll see all three of the main new forms. So keep that in mind.
and they'll be in transaction desk by the end.
They will be in transaction that by the end of the week.
So deals that are under contract from last year, you need to update
Yeah,
And then
and give the pamphlet.
and.
Give the new pamphlet. You have to give the new pamphlet.
in transaction desk, then is John Scott or the deal, but like packet, like these are the things that we initial, like, so we have like the listing agreement, like it's gonna be like, okay, here's the buyer's agreement, here's the pamphlet, here's the.
Yes, so that's already done right now. It already replaced automatically from our, that's in our transaction desk right now. Question? I saw. No. As soon as you select from your forms pack and you choose the buyer pack, those are already in there. So that's already done. This class, like I said, got updated, and they have a brand new toolkit that you can automatically download from a Dropbox. And it has all of the forms and the disclosures and the JLS buyer's advisory and a seller's market and on and on and on. It actually, it's a little overkill. It's a lot in it. Did you open it? You finally got to work? There's a lot of stuff in it. I mean, but it is nice to have it all in one place. So they're going to share that in the class. You can't get clock hours again for the same course number. So unfortunately, if you want to take it again, you can. It's actually playing again Thursday and Friday. So you'll see it on a calendar, and I'll send that out today. So anybody who missed the one that we had in December, definitely take it. I mean, definitely take it. It was a good class.
Is that the one that was the last week?
Yep, that was the one that was last week in here. Yeah, it was
Is
packed
that the
house.
one with
Aaron and Jeff.
in here?
Yep. Yep. All right, with that, let's go ahead and dive in on the 41. Like we normally do in forms classes, we use the forms manual, not the forms itself, so that we can dive in deeper and get better explanations of how to use the forms. They literally got these uploaded just last week, finally. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So buyer brokerage services agreement. Use this form to represent the buyer as the buyer's agent to assume the duties in RCW 188650 and to address the brokerage services terms as required under RCW 1886-20 and 1886-80. Note, firms may choose to create their own buyer brokerage services agreement to more effectively differentiate their services, accommodate buyers' needs and interest, and better compete in the market. All right, so here is the first thing for B. We'll start out. Ramona, you want to read B?
Sure. Statutory requirement to enter a buyer brokerage service agreement. On January 1st, 2024, significant revision to RCW 1886 took effect. The most significant change requires a broker who is the agent of the buyer to enter written brokerage services agreement with the buyer before or as soon as reasonable practical after its appointed broker commences rendering real estate brokerage services to or on behalf of the principal. The revised statute requires that the brokerage services agreement include certain provision which Form 41 contains. The statute provides that a broker may not receive compensation unless the brokerage services agreement includes the terms of the compensation. See Legal Bulletin 224 for additional information.
All right, that's good. So, I mean, the main part of the statute is, I mean, this is the law, but some of the questions I keep getting are like, why, like, this is like overkill. Like, really, like, how am I supposed to explain to a client that, that the seller's paying me? It's like, well, that's the purpose, that's the reason that they had the lawsuits, because there's not enough transparency and clarity in the process, and especially on the buyers. Hey, we have brokers in the industry forever oh, don't worry, I work for free. You remember this? I mean, you can't say statements like that. You don't work for free. You can't. Why would you? You wouldn't want to. So just remember that this is all for the good of transparency for our consumers. I mean, that's really what it's about. I know that some people are struggling with having to get buyers to agree to pay them, especially when they have family members telling them that this is ridiculous. Your agent's trying to tell you you have to sign a contract and agree to pay them. I've never heard of this. Yeah, it's new. Get ready. I mean, well, hopefully the news is going to start coming out, more and more. But it's just this is it. This is where we're at. We got to do it.
Well, because we know, it doesn't mean that everybody does. I was actually at the party and I was talking to one of my past clients and
Yeah.
trying to explain a little bit. And his eyes were like, what? Like, oh. So it makes sense that we need to master the dialogue, to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why, I mean, that's why you guys are here. It's basically, you want to learn these things inside and out, and the best way to do it is to do what we're doing. Get more AI. All right, so in addition to the RCW 1886, Northwest MLS Rule 101A1 provides the buyer brokerage firm's compensation shall be paid, 1, as published in the listing, if acceptable by the buyer on behalf of the buyer brokerage firm in the purchase and sale agreement, or 2, as modified by the buyer and buyer brokerage firm and the seller in the purchase and sale agreement. The purpose of this rule and related provisions in the purchase and sale agreement, specific term 17, is to ensure that buyer understands the buyer brokerage firm compensation and to create an opportunity for discussion and negotiation. Using a buyer brokerage service agreement is beneficial to both the broker and buyer in setting expectations, negotiating compensation, and discussing the broker services. All right, Yvonne, you want to read C? You can read all the way to here, I guess.
All the way to where?
Just read right to that one.
That will be.
Yeah.
Start to finish. Okay. Limited dual agency, written brokerage service agreement and consent. To be a limited dual agent, RCW 18.86.020 requires that a broker have a written agreement with the buyer, a separate written agreement with the seller, and that the buyer and seller both consent to limited dual agency. See Legal Bulletin 224 for additional information. For limited dual agency, be sure that in addition to using the buyer broker service agreement, your firm also has a listing agreement. E.g., I want to say IE so bad, e.g. NWMLS Form 1A or 1B with the seller that contains the required consent, acknowledgement, and disclosures. To meet the statutory consent requirements to act as a limited dual agent, the appointed broker must have a separate initial consent from both the seller and the buyer. The buyer and the seller must also consent to any supervising broker activity as a limited dual agent. However, that consent does not need to be separately initialed.
Okay, so let's unpack a couple things out of this section for sure. Questions that I'm continuing getting are like, so what's the biggest change in limited dual agency? All right, what is it? It's a name change. Like your duties and the process is the same. It's just that the state finally said, hey, we need to name this limited dual agency because before you really were limited, right? I mean, it's practically impossible to represent both parties. Attorneys can't do it. And you're drafting attorneys basically with these forms when you fill them in. You know, how can we do it? They can't. You know what I mean? So stay tuned for if they ever change that law completely. Because they've talked about that the whole time I've ever been in this business. Is that, oh, they're gonna get rid of dual agency. You shouldn't do it anyway. I think that was the first thing that was told to me when I heard about that.
So this limited dual agency, that is for when the same broker is actually representing both. This isn't for when like John L. Scott.
Correct. This is like if you, Amanda, had both the buyer and the seller, but you gotta have it written contractually
Isn't there a new?
and initialing in those sections.
Isn't there a new spot on the form addressing John L. Scott being the dual broker as well?
That in the 1A.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this is the thing to keep in mind when you're getting this form signed and the buyer's like, oh, you're saying, oh, don't worry, we don't have to initial this spot. I'm not gonna do dual agency and whatever. But then later on, your listing comes on and then that buyer like, oh, I saw your new listing. I wanna buy it. Now you're gonna have to kind of rewind and kind of go back and like amend agreements because you cannot forget that those are not initialed or initialed. So in the event that you need to amend it, you would have to amend, either your listing or the buyer brokerage agreement. You'd have to do both. You just have to make sure if you're gonna do both and you're doing limited dual agency, you're initialing both sections on that's on the listing agreement and the buyer agreement. Jim?
If you refer someone out, let's say someone to your own office, isn't that a variation of limited dual agency, or don't you have to disclose the seller that you're making money off of that, or?
Not for this section, for the initial. No. The firm is going to have its limited dual agency under the firm still, which that was the same. All right, paragraph 4, let's see, Hayden, you want to take this one?
Paragraph 4 addresses the buyer's consent to limited dual agency. Paragraph 4A contains initial and date blocks for a buyer to consent to the appointed listing broker acting as a limited dual agent. If the buyer does not wish to consent to the appointed buyer broker acting as a limited dual agent, the buyer should not initial or date this blank. Paragraph 4B contains the buyer's consent to any supervising broker who also supervises a broker who represents a seller acting as a limited dual agent.
Keep going.
Dang.
All right,
Should have split that.
I guess I was a little smart. All right, so distressed homes. The agreement provides that the firm will not participate in a transaction that is a distressed home conveyance unless otherwise agreed in writing. A distressed home conveyance is a transaction where a buyer purchases a property for a distressed homeowner defined in chapter 6134 RCW, allows the distressed homeowner to continue to occupy the property and promises to convey the property back to the distressed homeowner, or promises the distressed homeowner an interest in or portion of the proceeds from a resale of the property. For more information, go see Legal Bulletin 181. All right, so now time to assist in filling in the blanks. So again, in the forms manual, you can always use these numbers to click on and it shows you exactly what each one stands for and what the information is for each section. So of course, the buyer broker services agreement is effective upon mutual acceptance, effective date, and is made by and between. So here is buyer brokerage firm or firm, so John L. Scott Inc. Then there, and buyers' names for the real property located in the following areas. What do you think's a good area to write in here?
Washington State.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Guaranteed, if you end up like, oh, King County,
Oh.
South King, and all of a sudden someone like, oh, I'm gonna buy in, yeah, they're buying in Fife, all of a sudden they're on the line, right? And, cause this happens all the time.
Yeah.
People don't think they're gonna buy and live in one area when, when they're starting out until they go out and they actually look at houses and really figure it out. So to avoid all the issues, I would just write Washington, You're not gonna have to amend things later if you do that. Now, if you have certain buyers, you're going to be having these situations. All right, you're gonna have the phone call. Hey, Yvonne, I wanna go see your listing. It's a sign call. Okay, sure, great. You working with an agent? No? Great, I'll see you at the listing. You can show that listing. You don't have to have the agreement to go show that listing. Okay? Just try to remember you get a one meetup. That's all you get. After that, one meetup, or in the event you're at that first meetup and they're like, Yvonne, I love this house, but man, it's just a little bit too overpriced. There's a listing across the street. Can we go see that? As soon as the moment of where you've like met first, and now they want you to do broker services, right? Real estate broker services beyond that first meeting, you have to have the agreement signed before you go show that house across the street. Yes, it sounds stupid. It does.
In there, it said that, when I was reading through this stuff, that the exclusive, you can't have two exclusives signed. So, I mean, you have to be clear to enunciate that with somebody that's showing up, if they.
Oh, yeah.
It's gonna be a mess.
Exclusive and non-exclusive is really gonna be a topic of discussion with all your clients. In the event that someone's like, whoa, I'm not signing this, and you're saying, whoa, sorry, it's the law. You can choose, like, we can choose to do non-exclusive, but it's just for this house, or exclusive for just this listing. But I have to do this. I'm not allowed to not do it. You get one meetup, that's it. And once you've used it, that's it. Question I got, this is the first time I'm meeting this client. I talked to him on the phone, but we're gonna go look at 8 houses.
No.
8 houses.
Of those.
Okay, you guys are getting it.
How is this gonna be policed?
It's gotta just be policed by you.
Sure, us policing
Yeah.
ourselves, sure. But I'm just saying, in
There are so many
actuality,
agents
it's
who
gonna
will
be a
narc on
freaking
you.
wild west free for all.
Yeah, there's definitely gonna be, you guys, there's definitely gonna be issues out there.
Yeah.
We talked to a broker on the other end of a deal we're trying to like work with. They didn't even know the laws changed.
Oh,
They
yeah.
go, what? What changed? Cause they were asking for some different compensation thing and we're like, well, do you have your buyer broker services agreement signed? And they're like, what? What's that? Well, how long you been working with this client? Oh, we've been working together for a few months. Okay, well, it's 2024, the laws changed. Silence. So, I mean, yeah, you're gonna be dealing with this a lot. I mean, that's, it's the way it is.
Can I sign an exclusive for those 8 houses?
Yeah, you can sign an exclusive for those 8 houses. You can sign a non-exclusive for the 8 houses. I mean, it's all about how you're gonna come up and have the dialogue with the client for them to be comfortable. And really, you gotta explain it. You really gotta explain it that this is a new law. It's to bring transparency to our industry. That's it. Yeah.
So let's say the scenario you gave us, the client meets you at your listing, then they wanna go see other homes, cause they're not, in that moment, not convinced that your listing is for them. You have them sign an exclusive agreement.
Mhm.
And then they come around and they're like, well, the place I saw first, which is your listing, I wanna go back and see it, and you just have them sign a non-exclusive in addition to. so that
Once
they have
you,
the
once you have an
agency.
exclusive with that client, right, it applies to everything only in the event of you had Washington, right? If you've named it for just one house and it's exclusive for just that one house, it's just exclusive for that one house only. You're gonna have to amend it. Yep. And that's the thing that you guys are gonna have to probably be struggling with a little bit at first, is like really keeping things on track on what did you sign? What is it for? How long is it good for? So we have one question for Janet. What happens if a buyer unknowingly have signed an exclusive buyer agreement and later also sign an exclusive with you? Well, it's gonna depend again on what's the exclusive for. What's the exclusive for?
And they should have a copy of it.
Yes.
So that's the one thing to remember too, is that they should have a copy of everything that they sign.
Yep. Because as soon as they sign something in, in AuthentiSign or DocuSign, it automatically emails them that final copy and they will have it. So you're gonna have to, talk with your clients and make sure you're gonna be doing a lot of educating. You're gonna be educating the consumer, and my guess is you're gonna be educating a lot of other brokers. So, this is just, you're gonna have to get used to it for a little bit.
So Eric, I know that we're gonna be doing more open houses and stuff, and so we're gonna be having some blank forms. So hard copies of these.
Mhm.
For those who have iPhones, you would end up needing to leave that form with them so they can have a copy of it, but on your iPhone, you can scan
Mhm.
the documents. I
Yep.
don't know about Androids, but.
You
I know
can,
the
there's
iPhone-
apps, there's a couple of really, really good ones.
Scanners.
Turbo Scan is amazing. They also have Turbo Fax that connects to your scan if you need the fax right from your phone. I mean, I've had to use it twice that I've ever had, but I was remote area and it worked. So might have to do stuff like that. All right, let's continue. So in the following areas, let's look and discuss number 3. Okay, area, insert the geographical areas where the broker is providing brokerage services for the buyer to purchase property. Again, I think in the beginning, if you're first meeting, someone or working with someone and you don't know the full scope of where you might be providing your services, just put Washington. Now you're covered. You won't have to amend it. If they're struggling and they're, I don't know about this, and I'm not ready to sign a contract, I just want to look at a house. Say, that's not a problem, but by law, let's go ahead and make this for just this home only. In the event you want to buy this home, then you, for one, you're gonna know right away, am I wasting my time? I've already heard some of you say this already, like, oh my gosh, I'm actually kind of liking this new law thing. I totally saved my weekend. I would have probably ran out and shown this house, and here they had another agent who's gone.
So
And
what
they
do you
weren't
do?
gonna use you anyway.
What do you do if you say, oh, I have an agent, I have already a contract with them. I just want to see the house.
Then it's your business decision. If it's your listing, then it's, is that something that you're gonna wanna do for your seller? Probably in some occasions, yeah, you might.
But if it's not,
But if it's not, they already haven't, then you're wasting your time.
But if it's your listing and they call you, it's a sign call, you can show them that house anyway without the agreement. It's
True.
moving on to the next house.
It's moving on beyond that first meeting.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
And for an exclusive agreement with one specific property for area, you would put the address of that
just
house.
put that at address. Yep. Yeah.
I think it's gonna be an interesting
Be it.
when you say, sorry, I can't show it to you.
All right, term. Insert the length of the agreement and number of days under RCW 1886-20. The agreement must include a default term of 60 days with the option for a different term. If the buyer and the buyer broker desire to terminate the agreement, Form 53 termination of buyer brokerage services agreement is available for use. Pop quiz, non-exclusive. Do you need to get one of those signed? What do you think?
I would say yes.
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 Got a lot of yeses in there.
What sign? Because
Cancellation. Trumps at 53.
Huh?
They have an exclusive sign that would trump the.
Yeah.
Right. You don't really have to get anything signed. Non-exclusive means the buyer can use anybody. They could go and literally, this is the scenario. Hayden can have the listing. Levin brings the buyer. Buyer's like, okay, I want to buy this house with Levin. Levin has a non-exclusive agreement. But then all of a sudden Amanda's like, hey, I know that buyer. They visited my open house. I got a non-exclusive too. All of a sudden Amanda writes it up for the buyer. Is Levin owed the money? Why? But Levin found the home for the buyer,
He
right?
previously saw the.
It's first
with
come,
the
first
vendor.
served.
With
Good
the,
price.
That's the best way.
with the non,
Non-exclusive.
Oh, one at a time.
I think it's just the easiest way to think about it. It's first come, first served with
But-
non-exclusive.
but is there language in the non-exclusive still about the procuring costs?
Yeah.
I was waiting for it. I asked the attorney, I go, what does this law really mean, like for procuring cause? And then they started laughing. Because it's gonna come down to who writes it and who has exclusive and non-exclusive. If you have an exclusive, let's change the scenario. So first, let's make it clear. Levin would not get paid. Okay, even if he found that house and he's like, oh, I found the perfect house, call the buyer. Buyer goes, Amanda,
That's why they.
I owe you a beer. I owe you a beer because you bought me one the other night. So here, you want write this house up for me. We got that non-exclusive. Amanda would get paid. Whoever writes it gets it. Okay, procuring cause is just very, very blurred. That was hard to prove even before, right? To get
Non-exclusives.
non-exclusive.
Anybody.
Now, we're changing the same scenario. Levin has an exclusive. He calls Amanda, buyer calls Amanda. I want to write this up with you, Amanda. Amanda goes, okay. She writes it up,
Not so fast.
right? She writes it up.
But I mean, obviously, as I'm writing up the offer and then also have them sign a buyer's agency agreement with me,
Yeah, but they've already signed an exclusive.
They already,
with
no,
Levin.
you already have the non-exclusive with them.
I already have a non-exclusive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. But Levin has the exclusive.
But Levin has an exclusive. So in that event, what do you guys think is gonna happen? Who gets paid? But who's Levin get paid from? Who owes the money?
The buyer.
I
The
would still
buyer.
get paid by the listing agent because it's,
Yeah, we would have to send a demand. We would have to I mean, believe it, it's still gonna be a struggle thing. And these things are gonna be happening. I promise. It's gonna happen because clients aren't gonna quite understand.
With an exclusive.
With an exclusive, yeah.
the buyer would owe.
The
him.
agreement is with the buyer
The
and
agent.
the buyer broker.
Mhm.
Buyer owes the money to Levin.
So
But
even
she's
though
gonna
the listing agent and the seller is offering commission.
Cause I got,
Sure,
cause
Yeah,
I wrote
she-
up the
she
offer
wrote
with
it
my
up.
non-exclusive, even though they have an exclusive, but when the buyer signed that exclusive with Levin, they were agreeing to pay him.
right.
So
with
oh my God,
all
what a mess. Okay.
Yeah.
All these antitrust lawsuits, that sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen. if
Well,
something wouldn't happen.
It's one of those things. Yeah, I mean, it could be I mean, how many companies are gonna stay in business if they go around and they're suing all these buyers?
Oh, no, no, no.
It's not gonna look good.
No, but
It's
you
not
are
the
gonna have,
purpose.
you are gonna have.
But
those
you'll have to
agents who's
fight.
gonna- Yep, they're gonna fight.
Yep, there will be.
We
There
gotta
will
make
be-
sure
Well, I mean, I guess
that
it comes
these
down to
buyers
the buyer,
understand.
right? So the buyer has to
That would
be,
wrong.
the buyer knows what he's doing at that point, right? They
Yeah.
signed exclusive
Maybe he
Levin.
does.
Maybe.
Well, I
Maybe he
mean,
knows.
but that's what that form tells you there. It's in the form, right?
Yeah.
They know.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, Amanda's, how would she know? She does,
And don't
she's
we
a
ever
renowned
pay
buyer.
someone?
Yeah. All right, we got a new question here from John. Question on helping write an offer on our listing with a buyer that insists on being unrepresented. Will they need to sign a 41? No. Nope. If they're unrepresented, they're unrepresented. Just don't forget, when you do write those up, you properly mark it. You still have to give them the new pamphlet. You still have to give them that. So that it's, proven that you did. But do not fill in the other side of the form. As far as like where the brokerage and broker information is on the bottom, you leave that blank. I've seen a lot of mistakes where people have unrepresented, and we look at the front page of the purchase and sale, and it's filled in on the bottom, it's the same broker. That's confusing. Even the attorneys went into details about do not fill that in. Question?
I'm still confused. Are we saying the unrepresented is those who don't want to sign any buyer brokerage forms?
No. What's
No.
an unrepresented buyer?
They're just writing it up with the listing agent. They don't have any representation.
There's no representation. They're not representing them at all. There is a box on the front page.
Okay, great.
Yep.
And there should already be addressed in the listing agreement how much the compensation will be.
Exactly.
Not in the listing agreement.
Yes,
Yeah.
it says now, if the buyer is unrepresented, then listing compensation will
Yep.
be X.
All right. Time for the term, right? 60 days by default from what the new law was set at, right? They said it has to be 60. You can write it for less. So if you get the question, people are like, oh, what if I only want to agree to this for 20 days? You can. The law is supposed to be, think of it like an inspection. What's the default? 10? You can write it for less. So you can. It's not very wise. How long do you think is a good term for these? How long does it usually take to work with buyers? 90?
180.
180?
Depends on the buyer, man.
That's-
Some are ready day one and some are not.
I'd rather have the time.
How many people, raise your hand if you've been working with a buyer for a year? 6 years. Oh my God.
Troy. Sorry.
Oh,
You just can't find anything, huh?
Cannot find the perfect.
can't find it.
Blade of
Now they want
grass.
vacant land.
We want to build.
They want to build, oh my God.
They can't find the perfect blade of
So-
grass.
Just don't forget, the law state, it has to be at least, it should be 60. Most of it's gonna come down to that consultation, right, with the buyer for you guys to have dialogue and figure out what is the right timing. Joe?
Okay, so if that 60 days is a mid-transaction and terminates in mid-transaction, you have to get another amendment signed to do that, or if they're under contract already?
So just like a listing agreement, if you had the term for a listing to be 60, you get a deal on the 50th day, it closes on the 70th day, you don't need to amend the agreement, it continues through that contract. If that deal dies, yep, you gotta get a new one, or update it, amend it.
I got a question. So you're working with a buyer that you just met.
Mhm.
Can you, coach them on, using a Form 53 if they're not sure, like what agreements they've had in place with other folks? Or can you make a blanket 53 that says everybody that they worked with prior to you? Can you do anything?
No.
No?
You can't provide a form to someone who's already has agency. As soon as you do that, yeah, that's solicitation of an active buyer. Yeah, I mean, that's the new,
Can you coach
Phrase.
them on, hey, if you want to work with me, and you're gonna have to cancel this? And this is
Yeah.
the form that you.
yeah, just think of it like a listing. You guys couldn't do that with sellers. You couldn't say, oh, you got an agreement with the seller. You want to work with me now? That listing would have to be terminated. Same thing.
Yeah, tell them to terminate.
No, you're not supposed
Coach
to.
them though, it's like, hey, if you want to work, I don't care to do that.
Yeah, it's,
So then how do you get?
you just have to say when that's ended,
They can-
then you can work with them. Do that strategically,
Yeah.
please. All right,
Yeah.
buyer broker, obviously insert your name. All right, agency relationship. So number 6. Let's look at this. So pamphlet, right away in the agreement for agency is they've acknowledged receipt of the pamphlet. Some people ask, can I have them initial it? That's fine, you can. I mean, you don't have to, as long as you've got it in to Authentisign or in your transaction desk, there's recorded records. It's there, you have that. It's okay though, if you want to. Some people are gonna still continue to do that, it's totally fine. Buyer brokerage firm appoints, this is where your name goes. To represent buyer, this agreement creates an agency relationship with the buyer broker and any firms managing brokers who supervise buyer broker, supervising broker. No other brokers affiliated with firm are agents of buyer. So that's that little mini disclosure of supervising brokers within the firm.
So may I ask a question?
Yeah.
On number 3B, you're putting down your name, but you have a little small team. And so the person whose name is on there can't go, but the other person on the team wants to take them out, write up the offer.
Then you might, if it's that type of situation, you might as well put both your names on there.
Okay.
Yep, you might as well, because otherwise, as soon as they're like starting to provide
Mhm.
buyer brokerage, services, you might as well just get it signed.
Okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
just be real careful, because I know some people like have teams. They have like a listing and then they add I don't want people to add them immediately unless you know for sure they are going to be doing services.
Right.
Because otherwise you're gonna be in that situation where, oh, I got a listing. Oh, the buyer called and sign up, partner, you go show it, you meet with buyer, and it's a great meeting and they want to work with them.
Mhm.
And then now you'll be stuck trying to backtrack this if you added them immediately. So just make sure you know the route you're going.
Yeah.
And you keep track of it so that if you have to amend it later, then you can. Agency relationship. Buyer brokerage firm's representation of buyer for the purchase of real property in the area shall be non-exclusive if not checked. If you don't check a box, by default, it's non-exclusive. So definitely check a box. Exclusive buyer may not enter into an agency relationship with another real estate firm during the term for the purchase of real property in the area. Exclusive agency or non-exclusive buyer may enter into a non-exclusive agency relationship with other real estate firms during the term non-exclusive agency. So got to make the choice. Again, you're going to have dialogue, with the client to be able to figure this out. If it's a good, what's the right fit for the situation or for the property or whatever. You just really are going to have to be, figuring this out from the beginning. Obviously, we're going to want you to do exclusive, just like, we read earlier about the 1As. They mentioned the 1B. 1B is bad. It's the same thing. Like the seller wouldn't have to sell the property if all of a sudden they sold it themselves during the term. Like someone came over across the street and said, hey, I want to buy your house. Great, I'll sell it to you. I don't even need the agent. Just needed them to advertise everything and stage it and clean it and do Market Ready Plus and work on it for 90 days. So just think about it. Let's see, did we read? All right, let's read. Let's see who we got on this. Where we be up? Amanda, you want to do 6? I'm gonna grab a water.
6, agency relationship. RCW 18.86.020 requires that a buyer brokerage services agreement include checkbox options for the buyer to select either an exclusive or non-exclusive agency relationship. Paragraph 3 of Form 41 includes a brief explanation of the differences between exclusive and non-exclusive agency representation. In addition, paragraph 7 of Form 41 addresses the difference of when compensation is due under exclusive versus non-exclusive agency representation.
Good job, Amanda. So there it is in detail, whether or not someone's gonna owe you money. You're gonna be doing lots of conversations with your clients to explain exclusive and non-exclusive.
With the John L. Scott, is it the same? There's a box for exclusive and non-exclusive, or is it just exclusive?
It's choice, same thing, I think.
Okay.
Hold on, let's get it. Yeah, you can do the same thing.
Gotcha.
All right, back to our 41. All right, limited dual agency, buyer broker is limited dual agent. If initial below, buyer consents to buyer broker and supervising broker acting as limited dual agents in the sale of property that is listed by buyer broker. Buyer acknowledges that as a limited dual agent, RCW 1886-60 prohibits buyer broker from advocating terms favorable to the buyer to the detriment of the seller and further limits buyer broker's representation of buyer. So see how it kind of like explains that it limits because it's in a limited capacity. So in the event the buyer is okay with limited dual agency, you'll have to have them initial this. And that's the section that we just read. Compensation. Insert the compensation for the buyer broker services. Amount of compensation in paragraph 5. The firm and buyer must agree upon the compensation for the buyer brokerage services. There are a variety of options, including a percentage of the purchase price, a flat dollar amount, and any other compensation arrangement that the firm and buyer may agree to. There's also an option to designate a different compensation amount in the event the buyer broker is a limited dual agent representing both the buyer and the seller. Note that the buyer does not automatically agree to pay the compensation that is set forth in paragraph 5. Some buyers may not have funds to pay their broker, may be unable to lawfully compensate the buyer broker. Example, VA regulations prohibit buyer paid compensation, or may be unwilling to agree to upfront compensation as noted below. There's an option in paragraph 6 to request that the seller pay any compensation that is not already covered in an offer of compensation that may be made by the seller in the listing. So let's break this part down first. And do not forget, in the classroom setting, we're not supposed to discuss percentages because that is exactly what the lawsuits were about, right? That we're colluding, right? So I'm going to give dollar amounts just for the example of classroom. This does not mean in any way, shape, or form that you have to do dollar amounts. I got a lot of questions like, so we can't do percentage anymore, Eric? No, that's not it. Of course you can. So just want to make sure that's clear. So compensation. Buyer broker acknowledges that there are no standard compensation rates, and the compensation in this agreement is fully negotiable and not set by law. The compensation for buyer brokerage firms' services, the compensation shall be. So we have A, percent of purchase price or dollar amount or other. B, if buyer broker is a limited dual agent and represents both buyer and the seller, then the compensation shall be equal to the amount in subsection 5A if not filled in. So first things first, whatever you are going to charge is what you need to be putting in this box. I keep hearing people saying, hey, I want to do a range. You can't do a range. Annie went over that over and over. She was like, do not try to write a range. As soon as you write a range, what are all clients going to say? It's the lowest amount on there. Think of it as the on or before thing in contracts, right? When is that? Just don't do it. You're gonna run it, you would run into issues and it's not gonna end well. Put your flat amount. Let's say that you're going to charge, I charge $3,000 for my buyer brokerage services. You will write 3,000 in here. Get my take here. Let's say if the listing was, $3,000, when I negotiate for the seller to pay it on my behalf, then the buyer owes nothing. And that's the name of the game. That's what you're trying to do, right? At all times. That's the dialogue you're going to be having, with each and every consumer is, hey, yes, we have to have these contracts. Yes, I have to have a statement of what's going to be paid for my compensation. I'm going to fight to get it covered by the seller. Pretty much what normally has taken place before. In the event it is lower, there are options, right? And that's the part of the dialogue you're going to have to get comfortable with and figure out. If you're going to say you charge less, I want you to think about this. In the case, if I was gonna say, oh, I'm only gonna put $2,500 for my example. Right? And let's say the listing is offering $3,000. Now there's money left over there. Where's that money gonna go?
Depends on what you check here.
Yeah, it's gonna depend on what you mark. But do you want to be in that situation where you have to go and negotiate it back the other way later? Or would you rather have it set to your standard on what you want to charge and then reduce it after you get an agreement? What's better?
So you can reduce it.
Yes, you can amend it later. Let's say you charge $3,000 for my example. And the buyer's fine with that, and in the event, you mark it as it'll be paid balance by the buyer. We'll pay the balance. Let's say that's what you marked it as. Okay? So at this point, you got mutual, you're getting $2,500 from the seller. And then the buyer has to pay you $500 more at closing, right? To equal your $3,000 total dollars. If you are fine with accepting the $2,500, you can use the 41A to amend your agreement. And now you will write it in to be $2,500 and then change the term for this property. That's gonna be the way you're gonna wanna do it. So then you don't have to go back and make amend something again, because in the event all of a sudden this deal falls through from an inspection or whatever, and then the next thing you know, you're out shopping for a house again, and then you never amended it. Let's say you amended the whole thing for the whole state. Then you would be stuck with getting your $2,500 only. I just don't want you guys to have to be fighting back later. Question?
Yes, I have heard from other agents that they've been trained on when they're talking to their buyers to say that, I charge, let's say, $3,000.
Mm-hmm.
But in case the seller wants to offer $2,500, what we'll do is I'll put the 2,500, but if there's overage, you'll pay, that will come to me. So instead, you're saying, I do charge this, but I'm willing to accept that. But if it's over, it could be over by $500, it could be over by $1,000, it could be over by $1,500, whatever it is, goes to me.
You could.
So that is
Yeah.
what I've heard from other.
That's okay too. Jim?
I'm kind of hearing something, but I don't think we're talking about the whole picture here. I think we need to maybe discuss this another time. So I'm hearing from you, when I'm interpreting what I'm hearing from you, is you're saying it's what you charge.
Yeah.
So if we have a seller that's paying no buyer agent compensation, are you saying that I, as an agent here in Kent North, am free to charge $25 to work
No.
with a buyer?
No.
Okay, so we have to, that's not something we're gonna discuss right now.
Right.
Okay, but you have to understand the standard, what you're willing to take and what we work for here. And we don't work for free. We don't work for $2,500. We don't work for X, Y, and Z. You know all what I'm saying is we're entitled to get compensated relative to our worth. Okay, so when we talk about, and Eric has to phrase it that way, but what I'm hearing is you're free to charge whatever you want to charge. No, you're not free to charge whatever you want to charge. We are free to charge whatever we want to charge as a company.
Yeah.
But you as an agent are not authorized to speak on behalf of the company without consent. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so you all hear what I'm saying, that I'm not saying.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
So at
So
what
we need
point,
to have
All I'm
your.
saying is, we're entitled to get a commission. We're not free to charge anything you want or you want or you want.
Yeah.
We have to fight for it, just like on a listing. We don't keep listing for $50 or $100 listing commission. We present and we get what we feel we're entitled to, and 99% of the time we get what we're entitled to. Okay, so again, remember in your presentation, you're not just free to say,
I work for free.
Maybe I'll
You
pay.
understand.
There's no
We're
minimum.
negotiating on behalf of the
You
company.
can't say that yet.
You're
Well-
negotiating on behalf of the company.
There's,
Yeah.
Eric is saying that you and him cannot state what is the minimum that John Scott.
No, we can, but we're not ready to do it yet.
Okay,
That's
fair
all.
enough.
That's all.
Well, only because.
But you know what that is.
Yes,
It's
well,
what it's always been.
only because there was something from the MLS that came out actually today.
Mhm.
And it talks about, can I charge whatever? One, they said, because my office is saying that it's this amount, and they said your office can have a rate amount that you are required to, and it's okay to say that. So you tell me what your rate is.
I think I got in trouble one time, but I really did on the listing, and then they turned around and listed with somebody else, and.
You can't
Yeah,
put
she
both,
said
Shelley.
that.
You can only use one box. One box, not both boxes. No. Do a percent. Do a percent, okay? So. Okay, so let's dive in a little deeper here.
Tell me what it is.
Thinking about the AP, here we
I
go.
need one of those number machines.
Here we go. All right, amount.
As long as it's not a charge.
Okay, so we did this part. We did this part. All right, source of compensation. Let's keep going. Let's see. Aaron, you wanna read? Read, go for it, man. Read.
Can't see.
All right.
That was me.
The source of compensation, the seller may, but is not required to, offer compensation to the buyer brokerage firm. Form 41 accounts for different scenarios that might arise depending on the amount of the compensation offered by the seller. And these options correspond to the seller's offer of compensation adjustment that a buyer may negotiate with the seller from the buyer broker's firm's compensation addendum, Form 41C, as part of the purchase and sales agreement.
All right, so. Source the compensation, so one, seller's offer equal to compensation. So section 1 in B, let me click on, get back here so we can see it. All right. All right, we still need to kind of like read through this part. So a seller may, but is not required to offer compensation, just like Aaron said, to firm representing buyer. In the purchase of a seller's real property, seller's offer is disclosed in the listing. Shall be stated in the purchase and sale agreement and may be accepted by buyer on behalf of firm in the purchase and sale agreement. Seller's offer equal to compensation. So option A is where your agreement matches what the seller's giving, okay? If seller's offer is equal to the compensation, buyer shall accept seller's offer and buyer shall not be obligated to separately pay the firm. B, seller's offer greater than compensation. If seller's offer is greater than the compensation, buyer shall accept seller's offer and buyer shall not be obligated to separately pay firm. The amount of seller's offer that is greater than the compensation shall be paid to firm, credited to buyer to the extent allowed by buyer's lender, and any non-allowed amount paid to firm, credited to the seller or other. So you could do the situation, like Yvonne said, you could say $2,500, and then you can mark that, and then that would make it to where if it is higher than, that works. You can do that. But I don't know, it's gonna come down to, I think, probably to the client, each client you meet with.
Mhm.
Okay, C is seller's offer less than compensation. If seller's offer is less than the compensation, buyer shall accept seller's offer, if any, and either pay the difference of the compensation to the firm at closing. B, request that the seller pay the balance of the compensation to firm as part of buyer's offer to purchase the property, or other. Most of the time, you're gonna be marking the second box. I mean, that's pretty much how every one of your, probably agreements are gonna be.
Multiple offers, huh?
Huh?
Multiple offers.
When you write them, yeah.
It all depends on what the client can do.
Exactly.
Depends on what the client can do.
So next is the compensation terms. Let me go back and make sure we read AB again. Okay. So sellers offer less than compensation. This section provides options for the situation where the sellers offer a compensation is less than the agreed upon amount. The buyer can commit to directly pay any balance to the buyer brokerage firm, or the parties can agree that as a part of buyer's offer, they will request the seller to pay the balance. Or the parties can agree upon some other arrangement. Note that if the buyer does agree to pay compensation to the firm, assuming the compensation in the buyer brokerage services agreement is more than the seller's offer, the compensation is due at closing unless the parties agree to another payment arrangement or arrangement in the agreement, example, upfront fee paid to the firm. As of right now, we're not doing those. Our attorney's working and looking at the potential of making an addendum that will allow something like this.
A retainer.
It's like a retainer. Yep. So we'll stay tuned on that. Because there's definitely going to be some situations where you might need those. I don't know. We're gonna have to work through this and see how it goes.
People would know what they signed if they had to put $500 or $1,000
Yeah.
or whatever, like,
Yeah.
wait, I know I did sign something,
Right.
my $500 is at risk or something or whatever, if they had something like that.
So stay tuned on that one. Yeah, exactly. And paid to the firm. Compensation terms, paragraph 7 outlines when compensation is due for a closing during the term under an exclusive agreement versus a non-exclusive agreement. Similar to the tail provision in the listing agreement, paragraph 7 then provides circumstances where the buyer may owe compensation to the buyer brokerage firm if the buyer purchases certain property after the expiration or termination of the term. Insert the length of the tail provision. This section also includes the buyer's consent to the firm receiving compensation from more than one party, and to firms sharing compensation as long as the firm discloses the terms and amounts as required by the RCW 1886-30. D, showing properties. Buyer broker must show properties to the buyer for which there is no compensation offered or agreed to be paid unless otherwise agreed by the parties by marking shall not. This is the biggest thing in the agreement to show that, if buyer's like, I don't have the funds to pay this. I don't want to see any houses that are paying nothing or not paying the amount that you guys are agreeing for. Right? That's really the basis of why you will not have to show properties that don't have it or not. Before the old law, we would have to show those regardless. Now we don't have to. And this is a very important step that you as listing brokers have to understand and explain to your sellers. That, hey, the old law was we were required to show every house, even if it was paying nothing before. But the new law, the new contracts, the new forms stipulates and says that the buyer can choose and say, don't show me any houses that are not paying at least X. And that's the contract between the buyer and the buyer broker, right? So let's get down to that section. Compensation after expiration. So here's the tail provision. It's 60 days by default. That's probably plenty of time. So how that would work is in the event that after that term, but 60 days, you had an exclusive for that house that you showed and you wrote, you didn't get or something. And then all of a sudden later on, the buyer's like, oh, I'm going to write it up again. Someone else, you could go after them and say, nope, you still owe me because it's for this term, for this house. Or even if it's for Washington and you showed it, you had an exclusive, they're supposed to owe it. Those will be the toughest ones. If you didn't write it. Okay, exclusive agency, buyer purchases property that was brought to the attention of buyer during the term by the efforts or actions of firm or through information secured directly or indirectly from or through firm, or a property that buyer inquired about to firm during the term. Compensation is due when the purchase closes. Non-exclusive agency, buyer purchases a property for which buyer brokerage firm presented a written offer to the seller on behalf of buyer. During the term, compensation is due when the purchase closes. So the only way you get it is if you're writing it. Non-exclusive, just keep that in mind. Provided that in either event, if buyer or the seller pays compensation to another real estate firm representing buyer in conjunction with such a sale, the amount of compensation payable to firm shall be reduced by the amount paid to such other firm. So what that means if they said they were gonna agree to 3,000, or no, let's say they said $2,000. $2,000, they secured it, they wrote it, and then they got paid, the buyer still owes you $1,000. If you had 3,000 on your agreement. But again, those are gonna be very, very difficult to get. Additional consent, buyer consents to firm receiving compensation from more than one party and to sharing of compensation between firms, provided that any terms and amounts offered to or by firm are disclosed as required by the RCW 1886-30, and any amounts paid to firm reduced buyer's obligation to firm. Cancellation without legal excuse. For exclusive agency, if buyer cancels this agreement without legal excuse or without legal cause, excuse me, buyer may be liable for damages incurred by firm as a result of such cancellation. So if buyer cancels, let's see, we get this. Is it? I guess we went past it, didn't we?
You just passed.
Did I just pass it?
The top paragraph. One more. Oh, I see.
There's 8A. 8A. B, C. I guess it's all part of 8C. Yeah, they only talk about the tail provision term. I guess they didn't go into depth at all on that. All right, showing properties. Buyer broker must show properties. We already did that one, right? Yeah. Shall not.
Where's that box where you check if the buyer doesn't want to see properties?
Let's go back to the other thing. Oh, my word.
Sorry.
Nope, that's okay. I was scrolling the wrong way. All right.
Yeah.
Keep going. Keep going. All right. Right in here. So 8D, showings, listings, VA financing, showing properties, buyer broker shall or shall not, and shall, if not checked, be obligated to show properties to buyer for which there is no seller's offer and buyer has not agreed to pay the compensation.
Okay.
So this is the spot where, probably mark and shall not, with the discussion of the dialogue with the client. Amanda?
So, shall not, if there's no seller's offer and buyer has not agreed to pay the compensation. So anything less than what buyer has agreed to pay.
No,
No, doesn't say
it
that.
doesn't say.
It's just whether or not it's whether or not they're obligated to pay, let the buyer decide. Buyer, we're gonna be looking at a lot of properties. Sellers have the right to offer zero compensation.
Right.
Now, if we end up writing one of those offers and we can't get the seller to agree to paying the compensation on your behalf, do you even want to see those listings? Do you even want to be in that situation?
Sure, but it's gotta be less. If the buyer's signing a buyer's agency agreement, they are agreeing to pay you X amount.
Yes,
So.
that's what it is.
So it says, and buyer has not agreed to pay the well, buyer has already agreed to pay compensation of X, just signing the paper. So this is, it's only referring to ones that are less than buyer has agreed to pay, because buyer's already agreed to pay X.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you had an agreement with the buyer for whatever it is, you can mark this and say, it's, you know, that obviously means it's whatever is
Anything
less.
less
Yeah,
than
if it's
that,
less than
I'm
that,
not
you
gonna
want
show
it
you.
filtered, buyer, we can filter those
Got
for you.
Is there gonna be a commission field or, yeah?
There already has been.
There's a commission.
There already has been. It's been there for years. You have to add that field.
I didn't know you could do that.
Oh, yeah, that's been there. Yep. All right, one last, Zoomer. What happens when buyer indicates that that broker will negotiate with seller to pay compensation and seller refuses to pay any compensation? That's the conversation up front. Melissa, it's in the section of you marking what's gonna happen. Will the buyer pay the balance?
Yes.
I mean, realistically, if you have this marked, I mean, that's probably what you're gonna do. That means that you're gonna have to decide, are you, the buyer broker, gonna accept that? Or are you gonna
Walk away.
Yeah, you're gonna walk away? You're not gonna accept the term?
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to let your buyer know, like, look, I'm gonna make every effort to make the
Yeah.
seller, have the seller pay me, but
Yep.
the seller we may end up in a multiple offer situation where seller's like, look, I'm not paying this extra. You know, if we request that the seller pays my extra compensation,
Mhm.
they refuse to pay, but they accept your offer, buyer. It's your dream house.
Yeah, what do you
And
wanna do?
do you wanna lose your dream house over this X amount that you're paying me? It's, so, I mean,
Well, can't you reduce your commission?
No.
we're already agreeing to what my compensation is today, buyer.
I know, but because they didn't agree to it, can we not change that?
Once we submit the offer and it's accepted,
But it hasn't
you,
been accepted.
Yeah, I mean, if they countered and said, no, we're not gonna pay it, that's a counter.
That's-
You're at that step where you
Right.
guys can have the dialogue and discuss it.
so, but if that's the only sticking point, yes, well, that's great. So then buyer's not gonna be on the hook without a counter offer. So
Yeah,
we just gotta have these, I mean, no buyer wants to lose their dream house over such a small amount of money. Really, when you put it like that to them.
Why not have it?
I said they might not.
They might not
Officially
have
has-
Yeah, well, I mean, if it's a VA buyer,
if it's a VA, they can't pay it.
seller has.
They
to pay.
cannot pay it, or they can't pay you.
No, and I mean, these hopefully, as buyer brokers, we're gonna be putting a lot of faith in our brokers on the other side, that these listing agents are having these conversations with their clients, but unfortunately, that's not always the case.
Yeah.
So
One
you
more question.
mentioned earlier that you can amend your
You
commission.
can, yeah, you can
Okay,
amend
so
it.
we can do that. That-
You can
yes,
amend
I'm-
it.
Yeah, I was just having a dialogue.
Okay. Sorry, I was just like, be clear that I can do that.
It's true, though, that would be a counter.
Yeah.
So, buyer will fully know what they're getting into before they move forward.
But I agree with you we're gonna have to
Yeah.
educate our clients and kind of try to hold true to, this is the contract. We went over it, they know, so for them to come back now and say, but we were clear
Yeah.
about it.
Think about it this way. Okay, you're listing for a seller, right? And the seller's like, shoot, if I don't, they've got this crazy price and they're like, I want this price. And you're like, I only got comps for this price. Well, if you don't get me this price, I want your commission to be lower. Like, what? Everybody's heads are kind of sideways on that one. It's almost the same thing, Jim.
So Aaron, when you pre-approve a buyer, does it make sense when you look at how much money they have for down payment? You kind of put in an amount they could be able to pay for commission in there as well?
I've never thought about that, but
Well,
yeah, I'm gonna have to.
I think you have to.
Yeah,
Let's say they're looking at a
buffers.
$700,000 house and the commission is X, you can say, okay, you've got enough for down payment and you have another X to pay compensation should you need to.
Yeah, and I think that's a
I think you
conversation
do.
that I need to prepare to have to help you guys out too. Because if I'm gonna go in there going, oh, the hazard rate lower the commit, it's an out.
Well, because the buyer
I
doesn't
think
know
we have a
how
lot
much
of
that all is.
Yeah, they don't.
When they meet with the agent, it's like, oh yeah, I'll pay, but they don't know if they have the capacity. When you pre-approve somebody, I think it's.
Well, it's a
makes
conversation
sense
to
to
have.
do.
Yeah, and I
kind of
also
Tip
think,
them off and say, you have some room here.
yeah, the other thing too is that I was just thinking as we're going through this, we usually at the end, the underwriter is gonna look at it, the person who approves the loan is gonna say, hey, here are the total funds closed, right? And I don't know if
You know what I mean? That's, I don't know what we'll see on the estimated HUD, not the HUD one anymore, but the closing disclosure, right?
Yeah.
So that extra cash is, you're at, you know, here's my 3% commission, whatever it's gonna be,
Careful
right?
now.
And then it's like, crap, we don't have, oh,
He's a
sorry.
lender though, it's not the
Sorry.
same.
For example, if it was 3%.
Sure.
And now we're short funds to close, right? That's an issue,
Yeah.
right? So it's part of like, I think it's, again, I think that's kind of the pairing up of really working with the lenders and
And you
making
should
sure
tip
that.
off, you should tip off the agent too, say, look, these guys are tight, they don't have any extra money, if they had to pay commission, they've got no extra money.
Oh, yeah, and then if we're looking at, hey, we're looking at down payment assistance and stuff like that, there's no, I mean, we're not, you know,
Yeah.
those are the kind of clients you just know going in, 3% down. Is all we're gonna do. Probably not gonna have much, if anything, after
You're
that.
gonna have to tip off the agent and
But
buy.
Yeah, but the other part too is-
practice, you know, to know exactly if they have the funds or not.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah, we can't, yeah, and that's part of my questions, like typically it's like, hey, how much do you have? Great, but now it might be the conversation like, well, you didn't provide this other bank account, why don't we have this anyway? So we know, and help you guys out to know that you're working with someone who's viable that can actually pay.
Yeah.
For that, so it's
It's-
just, I mean, it's also interesting on the
Be
listing
a new
side,
world
too.
for lenders too.
Yeah,
But I just wonder, in actuality, you know, sellers have not had to offer compensation for years now, and they still do.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we all wanna, you know, buy and sell, help our clients buy and sell houses. So I mean, I think this is, I mean, who knows, I could be very wrong, but I still think that this is gonna be the minority
I agree.
of listings that come up
I
that we
agree.
have to deal with.
But there'll be some opportunistic age listing.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
That will go into a seller and say, hey, look, at good news. You know, I'm only gonna charge you 2% to list your house, you don't have to pay anything to anybody else to get the listing.
Sure,
There'll be some opportunistic people out there.
it'll be
So,
interesting.
but that's gonna be the minority, like you
Closing
say,
costs are
we're dealing with
not-
something that's gonna be.
It's gonna stay.
Not gonna be called double
It's gonna
down.
be really interesting to how it plays out. I mean, yeah, I'm.
All right, let's continue, you guys. More and more.
When does the lawsuit happen that, you know, the zero down buyer and these guys now they're getting harmed by this?
Yeah, they're
That
discriminated
basically
against.
It's like, okay, hey, well, I could have bought this house and they was offering this, but now I can't afford to buy a house because I can't afford the agent and the agent can't get paid zero.
There's a lot of groups out there that are starting those right now, but so far nothing's gone anywhere.
Have a good argument.
Yeah, Visa, veterans are not happy
At all.
about this.
What is, I mean.
I think
Yeah.
it's just- it's that tough.
It's such a protected
As a
class,
listing
though.
agent,
You
you're
can't
gonna have to
discriminate against
understand that,
veterans,
hey,
and this new
compensation
law is
put in,
like,
or no one's gonna
is
buy a
that
house.
discriminating against veterans? Maybe.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
it's
it's nothing we
from
can
it.
do, right?
There's nothing we can do, but it's gonna
Yeah.
go through the courts.
All right, let's talk about the filtering listings still, right?
Oh, no.
So buyer broker must bring listings to the attention of the buyer regardless of the amount of seller's offer of compensation unless otherwise agreed by the parties. If there's such an agreement, check this box and fill in the relevant information. If more space is needed, use section 14. So you can filter certain listings. You can write specific language. Okay, buyer broker shall bring listings to the attention of buyer regardless of seller's offer. Exceptions. This is where you can type in and say, you know, we will not pull up or will not go see listings that are not, you know, offering at least X. Or we're not gonna show listings that are offering zero compensation. We won't show those. That's a space for you to write information in. I think the main reason they did is for you to kind of base it on, we won't show any unless it's an amount that we're happy with. And I'll be happy with. So that's where this space is for you to write in. And then, of course, here's the C for VA financing due to VA regulations. If buyers obtaining VA financing, the compensation must be paid by the seller.
So then that's where you could put in that $3,000, but then show them where, if it is a VA, then they're not required to.
You can do that. All right, no warranties or representations. Firm makes no warranties, representation regarding the value or the suitability of any property buyer's purposes, but buyer agrees to be responsible for making all inspections and investigations necessary to satisfy buyer as to the property's suitability and value. Inspection recommended. Firm recommends that any offer to purchase property be conditioned on an inspection of the property and its improvements. Conducted by a licensed inspector. Firm and buyer broker have no expertise in these matters, and buyer is solely responsible for interviewing and selecting an inspector. In the event you're just giving your one inspector, that's kind of dangerous. That's one of those things where you probably should use that inspector referral form and then write in 3, let them choose, have them signed. So then that's an even more added protection for you and the firm. Here's the same no distressed home conveyance, same thing. I could go through that one again. Fair housing, local, state, federal, fair housing laws prohibit discrimination based on sex, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, race, creed, color, religion, caste, national origin, citizenship or immigration status, families and with children status, familial status, honorable discharge veteran, and military status, the presence of any sensory, mental or physical disability, or the use of support or service animal by a person with a disability. Attorney's fees in the event either party employs an attorney to enforce any terms of the agreement and is successful, the other party agrees to pay reasonable attorney's fees. In the event of trial, the successful party shall be entitled to an award of attorney's fees and expenses. The amount of attorney's fees and expenses shall be fixed by the court. The venue of any suit shall be in the county in which the property is located. There is a mini Form 34 here for other to write in stuff, so I don't know what we're gonna suggest here yet. I think once we kind of get through maybe a month or two in there, we're, things we're seeing, maybe we'll come up with some office clauses to where you can maybe add some stuff in this, but stay tuned for that.
I know that one, because I do buyer agency agreement. I know in mine, my other was buyer has agreed that they have received the buyer agency, not the buyer agency, the law agency, which is a different name now.
That's already in the form. They already agree to that. They acknowledge it.
This one they did.
Yep.
And this one,
Yep, it's right at the top.
And finally, Eric, with like,
Right here.
you've
right
got
there.
multiple buyers agents, or
Okay.
you have whatever, like, you had to have everybody always sign this then too, so you had to have 3 buyer brokers.
See that part again? So you have
So-
multiple buyer brokers?
Yeah, so like the team, like, like you said, we had to have everybody listed out as does everybody have to sign then that as well? Or just the,
Yeah, I mean, if you have multiple buyer brokers and they're all providing buyer brokerage services, they're showing properties, negotiating, talking, discussion,
so the.
then you might as well add them. Yep, add them on this. But you can put your name / the other person's name.
So type them all in the B there. Yeah. On 3B.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Type them all in.
yep.
that kind of makes sense, because if you have one buyer broker who took somebody out, but then the next weekend, they're not on duty, let's say if you have like a duty thing, that person's off, and a different buyer broker takes them out, their name is already on here, so that way
Yep.
they can move
You
forward.
can add that in the other.
Or other, yeah, if you needed
In the other
to.
column, you can add, amend.
List your-
add the other 2 buyer brokers in there. So you can have something you to put in the other.
You got one you can add in there.
I was looking for something.
All right, let's jump over to the 41A. I know we're running a little, we'll be running a little over today, but hey, we gotta do this. So this is the amendment to the buyer brokerage services agreement.
This is in the event you have a buyer's agency agreement from last year signed.
That too, it's gonna be you'll be using this one a lot to amend to multiple things. So use this form for amending or extending or adding to the buyer brokerage services agreement. Assessments fill in the blank, the date, the buyer brokerage firm, buyer's name, term, extension. So 4 is showing right where if you need to extend it. So here's the term extended. So maybe you did one for short term, or maybe you only did one as just a non-exclusive. You're gonna be using this form a lot. 41As are gonna be used a ton. So let's go back to 4. Agency relationship, if this amendment is to change the agency representation from exclusive to non-exclusive or from non-exclusive to exclusive, check this box, mark the box describing the amended agency representation. So you'll be probably maybe, using this section a lot. And then here's the also thing for agency and co-buyer broker. So firm appoints a co-broker. So if you need to add someone to the deal, you having someone watching your business while you're on vacation, this is what you're gonna be using. You'll be using this 41A and you're gonna be marking this, number 3.
Should we do this instead of putting multiple names on the first one?
Yeah.
Another form.
No, just use the other.
Multiple
Just
names on the other ones,
just
okay.
put it in the other fit. I mean, you could fit 2 people easily in that first box. I saw, was it a question? Okay. So same thing, you can amend it to that. 6, co-buyer broker. If this amendment is to add a buyer broker, check this box and insert the license name of the co-buyer broker. Number 7, limited dual agency. If this amendment is to add buyer's consent to the buyer broker and or the co-buyer broker acting as a limited dual agent on a transaction, check this box and the buyer should initial and date the appropriate section indicating buyer's consent. So in the event you had the 41, buyer didn't agree to dual agency, there's no initial on that form, and all of a sudden they love your house, your listing, and they gotta have it, and your seller's good with you being dual agent, and buyer wants you to be dual agent to write it, you gotta get this, you gotta get your 41 amended first. So to make sure that you are aligned to actually do limited dual agency. Okay. Agency, okay, so you would check this box, you would initial. And then the co-broker, all of a sudden you got a co-broker too, you'd have to have them and, have the buyer initial both of these. Compensation section. If this amendment is to amend the compensation, check this box and complete the information as agreed upon with the buyer. So if you're making a change to what the compensation is, compensation for buyer brokerage firm services is amended from the compensation set forth in the agreement to the compensation of whatever you're changing it to. Question?
Now, what if you get to inspection and you walk because of inspection and let's say you dropped it by $500? Is this gonna be what the rate or what the compensation's at moving forward, or does it default back to the first one?
So that's a.
Well, see, that's what I was saying earlier. Remember, you're making an amendment. It is for. Where is
I
the,
think you would amend it on that form. You're dropping it, you're just.
That's a 34.
You're 34.
Okay.
hold on.
The
You're
question,
negotiating the inspection.
Where is the
That's a
area,
good-
area?
That's a good question, because that doesn't have an address attached to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to.
I would put other, you have to put other and just say. Reduction of compensation is only for address. Boom. Only,
Yeah. More like a 134. you can do it here.
well, I mean, you gotta amend, try to keep the forms together, your 41 and 41A. I mean, they make a form for it, and it's telling you you're amending your buyer's agency agreement. The amendments for a reduction in the compensation for a property only. I would just use this and then write into other, say this reduction of compensation from original, buyer brokerage services agreement dated such and such date is only for address. Then there's no confusion at all that they can't say, oh, we're only reducing it
What if you
because
just,
of.
what if you just counter offer on a deal versus sale agreement?
Yeah.
You're going, the seller's not willing to pay X, you're willing to reduce your compensation, $500. You're dealing it on a purchase and sale agreement. It is for that particular deal. It doesn't apply to your relationship. If that deal falls through, you still have the buyer's agreement.
Is this cleaner and more specific?
Form, maybe.
Yeah.
not be-
I don't know. I guess I'll talk to Erin and kind of refer to her, see what she thinks on that one and two, just make sure I'm giving you guys clear advice.
Yeah.
I mean, you do have an agreement between the buyer and the seller, but again, right, that agreement's between them. You're like before on a listing, if you were agreeing to reduce your listing compensation, you can't have the buyer and seller, or buyer and seller sign on a 34 to reduce your listing firm compensation. So I would say this falls along the same lines. It's a buyer brokerage service agreement for them to pay the firm and you. I would say it's kind of falls along the same line. It's the same type of thing. That agreement's only between you, the firm and the buyer.
But-
Seller can't, seller can't change and sign off on that because you're not signing that form.
But there is the buyer agency agreement gives you the authorization to negotiate with the seller about your compensation.
Mhm.
So,
being paid on behalf to the buyer, for the buyer to pay it.
Hey, Aaron, on then these, on the compensations and stuff now that we're having a signed agreement there about what we're getting paid, is this gonna be something that's gonna be turned into the lender though, now that we have these going in as well, that underwriting's gonna be looking at like, okay, hey, we have a compensation agreement for our buyer. And now that where these funds are coming from and what's going on in this, in this contract or deal?
Well, I'm trying to think, because on the purchase and sales agreement, we're not, I don't know if this is not part of the purchase and sales agreement, right?
No.
So we wouldn't see it. So like anything else, like an inspection or something like that, we won't see it. Now, what will happen is that when the funds come to close at closing, right? They're gonna have a total bunch that you need to bring in. We need to make sure we have enough to cover all that. To do
But
that.
now, but if we can say, okay, they did closing costs or they did something and they're trying to make it work in there as compensation. And where it's gonna be worked at, I mean, like, you know, is it gonna be, we're always gonna need to change the price, or it's gonna be in closing costs, or it's gonna be in what, that's gonna get seen by the underwriting and throw this thing sideways?
Well, meaning that you need more money or?
Yeah, where the funds are coming from, you know, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are gonna have to be, don't forget, there's the new 40 and 40A, the, you know, compensation disbursement forms. There's ones that work the old way where it's coming from the seller side, but now there's ones for the buyer side. If buyer has to bring money to
No.
escrow, it's two different demands. And you have to make sure you're using the correct one. If the buyer's paying anything of compensation, it's gotta be on that, and it will be disclosed on the settlement statement.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, because before, we've done it before, where, I mean, rarely did you ever see the buyer bring in money.
Yeah.
But we've done it before, and it was just on the settlement statement, you just gotta make sure you have enough money to do it, so it won't really blow it up, and if we're short funds to close, and the guy can't bring it in, then you only gotta figure out what you're gonna do, you know what I mean, like, it's reduce the compensation, increase the purchase price to cover the cost as a credit, you know, I don't know.
John Scott IOU form.
Well, and if you do, we were talking about this the other day, and if you do have a note, right? And I mean, if you do a note where hey, the buyer's gonna pay you over 6 months or something like that, that's something we'll have to see. Because it's basically a debt.
oh my God, that, exactly, DTI now.
I'm
Being
just saying, like,
affected.
also because on the listing side, if you're gonna have any of the, you know, that some of these offices that aren't having these conversations still that are gonna come up here, then this is gonna be a surprise that shows up on these forms of what's going across, where compensation is coming from and who's getting paid, and, well, wait, this wasn't here and there, and, you know, it's gonna start to show up in the.
I mean, again, it's part of the conversation we'll have to have at the beginning, right? So part of now I'm gonna have to put in there, it's like, hey, do you get, I mean, I don't know if this helps for you guys or not. That for me to have that conversation, hey, typically, suppose it's 3% compensation, right? Here's what an agent normally makes, or, you know, that kind of thing, here's how it works. I can't, I don't.
Buzzword, he's a lender, everybody, he's a lender. He's a lender, it's okay, he's a lender, don't worry.
Having that conversation up front before, maybe you guys kind of gloss over a little bit until you start really getting into that, but for me to have a conversation and they completely understand, because it's easy now when they ask me, this is how it works sometimes, but now it's gonna be more, hey, be prepared, you might have to bring in compensation to your agent, and before it could have been paid by the seller, but just off that, but this is how it might be. So as long as I have that conversation, it makes it easier for you guys. Because, oh yeah, I talked to Linda about this, I kind of understand this, you know.
Yeah, no, that definitely helps.
Yeah.
If we are using this form to amend a previously signed buyer's agency, what do we check?
What's the reason for the amendment?
Cause it's,
There's multiple things.
cause the old one's expired. 'Cause
Oh,
we got
if it's
this new-
expired, then you're
I mean,
extending.
But the term isn't expired, it's because now we have this new form, because I used the 2023 version of.
Oh, then you need this.
Just, yeah, but what did we check?
Nothing. You don't have to if there's nothing changed. I mean, I guess I would fill it in just, you know, with points to you and maybe match it, maybe mirror what you already filled in before.
Okay,
It's just that they have to see that there's a new disclosure for limited dual agency to
Ah,
initial quote. That is what that's what the attorneys, and that's what Annie was like, this is what people have to understand.
Gotcha.
There's a whole new initial to, you know, for that disclosure on whether or not that they're okay with limited dual agency.
Okay.
All right. Boy, Zoom people, you guys are being kind of quiet.
Everybody's.
Yeah, their heads are spinning. Okay, so we talked that one, we did this one. Go back. We gonna talk about the dual. Say other, for any other amendments by broker service agreement, check this box, changes, date, buyer, signature. All right. Yeah. All right, you guys. Heads are definitely spinning. True. All right, you guys, let's open it up for some questions. We got Carrie's asking, since I used JLS form 41, transaction desk yesterday. Can I assume I need to send them the current one? You can do that, Carrie, or log into your My Desk and you can actually use the amendment. There is a 41A John L. Scott form amendment, so you can do that as well. Yep. So don't forget, if you start out using the John L. Scott forms, you amend it, you need to use a John L. Scott form to amend it. Using Northwest MLS form, use the MLS form to amend it. So there's no conflicting terms.
That's a good note.
Yeah. All right, we could stop our share here. Questions? Anybody?
Going back to VA.
Going back to VA, okay?
So we know that they can't pay anything.
Yep.
However, we're saying our compensation is $3,000 and we're gonna go and try to fight for it with the sellers. The seller's like, yeah, no, we're not gonna do that because they know it's a VA and that the VA is like, they don't have to, they're not obligated to pay. I don't wanna do any more. So then it falls back on the agent, not the buyer or the seller. So I don't know, that one just sounds harsh. Because if the seller is only doing $2,000 or zero,
Wouldn't the VA buyer have a pretty good freaking something against the seller refusing to pay?
no,
Doug,
no.
Eric, can I say something really quick?
Yeah.
So we had this instance, same situation. We
Yep.
had the lender made up the difference in the compensation in the price, and it worked out. So they can pay, but we added it to the purchase price.
But that's still coming from, that's a share of compensation coming from the seller.
Yes.
It's not the buyer paying it. Guaranteed, because the buyer cannot pay it.
Well, we had it done, so I'll talk to my lender who did it for us.
Well, I can see that though. I can see offering more on the home so that then, which in the end, it still comes from the buyer, but it doesn't look like it's coming from the buyer.
Buyers do that a lot anyway.
Yeah.
What if it doesn't appraise?
If it doesn't appraise, you're stuck in the same boat. Yeah, you're in that same boat.
Yeah.
Appraise it, it doesn't appraise, then you're screwed.
You're already worried about appraisals for VA buyers.
Yeah. All right, any other questions, you guys?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have to finish it. So what happens if one of our brokers neglects to have one of these buyer agency agreements signed? And the deal closes? Sorry, right?
Don't get
Get
paid.
paid.
We cannot legally pay them.
You don't get paid, you guys hear that?
Zero.
You don't get paid.
Cannot pay them.
Yeah.
Then you are.
And then I guess they'll give the money to the John L. Scott Foundation to give it to
Yeah,
the
we
Children's
get-
Hospital, or it goes back to the seller, because we can't even take it either. That's a good one. You like that one? I like that one. That's better. Better than it going back to the seller.
Yeah.
Get that.
Charity.
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
Yeah,
Can't get paid.
party.
Yeah, we could, okay.
All right, I will be on the lookout for the email coming today for that clock hour class. So if you missed the one that was last week, you got 2 days in a row for the opportunity to take it again
Okay.
it's tomorrow and Friday.
It's a 2-day class.
No, it's a 1 day. You choose. You want Thursday to take it or Friday to take it,
Okay.
or you can take them both. You can,
You're
you're
just
just not
gonna-
getting clock hours again.
Here or online?
It's on Zoom. Yep, I'll send that out.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for making it.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Eric.
We'll see you on the next one.
Also, if you